Welcome to the 700 Club. Inflation and abortion. Those are the top two hot-button issues hovering over the upcoming midterm elections. Well, today's latest inflation report shows April prices increased 8.3% over last year.
Well, President Biden tried to get in front of the inflation issue with an address to the nation yesterday. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats are planning a vote to codify Roe v. Wade into federal law. Heather Sells reports on both of these midterm maneuvers.
The president sees inflation as his top domestic priority, and for good reason. Both parties believe it will be the voters' #1 issue come November's election.
I know you got to be frustrated. I know.
Biden's not taking the blame, though. Instead, he's pointing the finger at supply chain problems, the war in Ukraine, and the GOP.
They don't want to solve inflation by lowering your costs. They want to solve it by raising your taxes and lowering your income.
And some Democratic voters say the president is not to blame.
Because of the whole world scene and the global pandemic that we experienced, there's little that could be done. I don't care what party was in the office.
Still, a new CNN poll spells out the president's troubles. It shows the public views this current economy as the worst in a decade. And a majority of U.S. adults say Biden's policies have hurt the economy. Midterm elections historically have served as a referendum on a president's performance. Biden hopes to avoid that by contrasting his policies with the GOP's. On Tuesday, he said he's reducing the deficit and working to make the wealthy and corporations pay more. And he pointed to a proposal by Florida Senator Rick Scott saying that Republicans want to raise taxes on families and end Social Security.
The other path is the Ultra MAGA plan.
Biden is also trying out new branding for Republicans, calling them MAGA or Ultra MAGA.
And I think what has struck him is how extreme some of the policies and proposals are that a certain wing of the Republican Party that is taking up too much of the Republican Party are for and are advocating for.
After last week's leak of a Supreme Court draft opinion on abortion suggesting it might overturn Roe v. Wade, it is clear abortion will be a big issue for some voters this year.
I think that most of our people will be voting based on values and worldview issues more than, maybe even more than economic issues, although I think they're all tied together.
But which side will galvanize more, those who support or oppose abortion? On Tuesday, outgoing Press Secretary Jen Psaki may have bungled her messaging on protests outside conservative justices' homes.
I know that there's an outrage right now, I guess, about protests that have been peaceful to date, and we certainly continue to encourage that outside of judges' homes, and that's the president's position.
Conservatives quickly pushed back.
The Supreme Court is one thing, absolutely, go there and state your opinions on either side of the issue, but people's homes adds a level of implicit threat that I think is inappropriate.
Senate Democrats are pushing for a vote on a bill to provide federal protection for abortion rights. It is not expected to pass, and many top Democrats are saying privately that the economy, not abortion, is what will move voters this year. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, for more on this story, joining us now is CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody. So, David, the president spent a lot of time yesterday blaming Republicans, then blaming Russia, and then blaming COVID for inflation. Is that going to convince voters?
No, well, clearly not, Gordon. Look, the president has said all along that the buck stops with him. Well, yesterday in that speech, it seemed like the buck stopped in many other places, but not with the president. And I think that's the problem. Look, people just aren't buying it, Gordon. And don't take my word for it. Just look at the poll. And maybe I should use the word, it should be plural, polls. I mean, poll after poll shows that Joe Biden is underwater with the economy. And it's not just with Republicans. Even quite a few Democrats are concerned. And then, of course, we get to independents where the bread is buttered, if you will. And so there's all sorts of problems. So this idea that you're going to blame Republicans, you're going to blame Putin, you're going to blame COVID is just not going to fly at all. Oh, and this just in, COVID started in 2020 under Trump. So this idea that inflation would all of a sudden be the main reason, COVID would be the main reason for inflation, that doesn't pass the smell test as well.
Well, it's not passing the smell test with Democrat economists. And so the economists from the Clinton administration all lining up saying it's the policies of the administration that are absolutely fueling the rise in inflation, and it's the runaway deficits and the unbelievable federal spending that's the rocket fuel for this. How are they responding to that?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you have Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary under the Obama administration, in essence saying these policies, it's too much. It's way too much. And this Build Back Better, which has never really gotten full traction, is a disaster as well. You've got problems when it's within your own party. And then we have the Consumer Price Index down a little bit. It was 8.5%. Now it's 8.3%. The projections thought it would be 8.1%. So there's kind of good news and bad news here. I think the projections that it would be lower at 8.1%. It wasn't that low. It was 8.3. So there's a sense here that the Biden administration is not just treading water, but they're flailing away right now, and they really don't have a plan. I mean, that's the problem. When you lead with the fact that it's Republicans' fault and COVID's fault and Putin's fault, and you don't have a plan, that suggests you've got major problems.
Well, let's push on to the other big issue that I think is going to dominate the midterms, and that's the Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade. And then Schumer is now pushing for a federal law codifying Roe versus Wade for all the states. So how is that vote going to turn out? And is this really going to be a rallying cry in the midterms?
Well, here's the problem, Gordon. Democrats think it's going to be a rallying cry, but let's just look at this from a numerical standpoint, from an analytical standpoint as well. What progressives in this country are what? Maybe tops 20%. So if you're going to galvanize your base, you're galvanizing potentially 20% of the folks that are for all of this. But the folks in the middle are not for this. The independents, Republicans clearly are not. And so what is your campaign cry? More abortions? Abortions all the way through in terms of late-term abortion? I mean, this is what you want to codify into law, in essence? I mean, that just is not going to fly in flyover country, if you will, in heartland America. And I think this is the problem for Democrats all along, that they're just not in step. And they think they are, but they're just not. And they are in for a rude awakening. And look, Chuck Schumer has been at this for a very long time. And, you know, this kind of goes in with the protests that we're seeing outside the judges' homes as well, the justices' homes. You know, Chuck Schumer a couple of years ago called for Gorsuch and Kavanaugh to pay the price. I mean, that's a bit of insurrectionist talk, if you will. And look what we're seeing today. And so the Democrats have all sorts of PR problems here, not just on the codifying of Roe v. Wade, but on the protests outside of justices' homes. Middle-class Americans, heartland Americans, independent Americans, let's forget the both polarizing sides for a second, just kind of the heartland of this country. They see what's happening. They don't like it. And, oh, by the way, did I bury the lead? The science is not on Democrats' side here. That's a big part of the problem here as well.
Well, I'm amazed at the position they're taking. I mean, you go back to Bill Clinton again, and you know, he signed into law a ban on partial birth abortion, and then amazingly, the Supreme Court struck down that law on the basis that it violated Roe versus Wade. I thought Hillary Clinton lost the race when she announced in the 2016 presidential debates that she was in favor of late-term abortion, and it just amazes me that they have switched so much in just a few decades that you have to have abortion on demand at any point in time in the pregnancy, including the day of birth. It makes no sense to me, and I don't see that as a winning issue for them in the midterms.
No, it's not, Gordon. You're making a great point here because they're trying to shoehorn the abortion into what they did with the marriage issue, right? I mean, we started with civil unions and it became gay marriage. Now we're into the transgender issues here. And so the Democrats see this as a leaning forward issue, a progressive issue. We're going to change the culture, a living, breathing Constitution. They're trying to do the same thing with abortion to kind of push the envelope. The problem is the science is not on their side, and that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's why they're having so much pushback, because it's just not with them here at all, and it's just not working, and they need to understand that. But they won't. They won't. They've doubled down. They've tripled down, and the red wave is a-coming in 2022.
Well, let's talk about the red wave real quick. How do you see the primaries stacking up for Republicans? It looks like Biden is trying to paint everybody as some kind of super MAGA. What's your view? What's your view of the power of a Trump endorsement? And where is the Republican Party heading?
There is no doubt that a Trump endorsement is crucial. I mean, look what's happening in Pennsylvania with Dr. Oz. He's up +7 since Trump endorsed him. We know Alex Mooney won last night in West Virginia against a guy, another Republican, who voted for that January 6th committee to be formed. And so that's a good indication of Trump's staying power, especially in a place like West Virginia. But you just go down the list. I mean, he's 22-0 last week. So, I mean, he's doing very, very well. A Trump endorsement is key to all of this. So, I mean, I think you look at that, and you know, ultimately, it looks like Trump's going to be the kingmaker again as we move forward.
David, thanks for the insights.
You bet.
In other news, Russia's anger over Western military aid to Ukraine could result in a widening war. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That is right, Gordon. Top U.S. officials sending that signal Tuesday in Senate testimony. One military general warning Russia could resort to nuclear weapons if the country feels as though it faces a, quote, existential threat. And the director of national intelligence cautioned the conflict in the next few months could become increasingly unpredictable and potentially escalatory.
And the most likely flashpoints for escalation in the coming weeks are around increasing Russian attempts to interdict Western security assistance, retaliation for Western economic sanctions, or threats to the regime at home.
Avril Haines suggesting President Vladimir Putin is preparing Russia for a prolonged conflict with ambitions beyond the Donbass. Haines describing Putin's focus on eastern Ukraine as a temporary shift. Meanwhile, the Senate will weigh whether to approve a $40 billion emergency aid package to Ukraine passed by the U.S. House of Representatives yesterday. Well, as the war continues, millions of refugees who have fled Ukraine face an uncertain future. One mom shared her thoughts about the dangers caused by the fighting and how Operation Blessing helped lighten the load.
We packed our things in one day and left. What struck me the most was how when you leave and you look out the train window, there are only men standing there. And you understand that maybe you won't see these people again. And maybe you won't come back to this city because there might be nothing left.
Valentina and her family left their home because of the increasing danger from Russian shelling. Valentina explained how hard it was to leave her life behind and flee into the unknown.
When you live in a complete family all your life and have everything, work, life, some plans for the future, and you want to become someone, then in one moment you realize you need to quit everything and run. It's scary. You don't even know what will happen minute by minute, because at any moment you can die.
Like many Ukrainian refugees, Valentina and her family faced uncertainty. But thanks to Operation Blessing partners, Valentina's family was met at the Medica border by compassionate volunteers who helped them on their journey.
Yes, volunteers are helping a lot. Some giving food, some carrying bags, some showing you where to go next. We really appreciate it, because when we left, we didn't have an exact plan. It was impossible to plan anything.
Thanks to Operation Blessing partners, we will continue to help crisis victims like Valentina and her family in Poland. We're providing refugee families a warm place to recover, hot meals, essential supplies, and loving encouragement.
You come to a point and need to go further, but don't know what to do or who to ask. Then, when a volunteer helps you, it's a very big help.
Help for Valentina and so many others in their critical time of need. Gordon?
And that help comes from you. If you're a member of the 700 Club, you're part of that help. You're part of everything we're doing around the world, and we're doing all of this in your name. So that thank you, that help, that came from you. So thank you for all that you're doing for the refugees in Ukraine.